This is Global Order. I'm so happy to have my old friend Abhijit Iyer Mitra on the program. Abhijit, today I'm going to talk to Abhijit about something called OSINT, which he talks about a lot. And I guess he's also a practitioner. Now, what is this open source intelligence that is applied around the world today? And how does it impact India today in its major security challenges, both with Pakistan and China? For all that, I'm delighted to welcome once again Abhijit Iyer Mitra. Abhijit, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Hindol. And
Abhijit,
thanks for talking on a subject nobody wants to talk about.
I thought it was really important, and you are just the right person, Abhijit, to talk about it because, like I said, you are not only somebody who uses it or follows it, but you're also a practitioner of OSINT. So, could you, to begin with, talk a little bit about how you use OSINT and why it has become so important?
Now, look, OSINT is basically what you call open source intelligence, right? And you'd be wondering, like, if it's open source, then how is it intelligence? Because it's available to everybody. Well, it's available to everybody, A, either for a fee, or B, for people who care to look what it is and where it is, right? Uh, a lot of it really depends on triangulation. Now, there are many kinds of OSINT. One is, people saying things very publicly. Are you going to take them seriously? Uh, and do you have a methodology? Can you triangulate it? The second, of course, is satellite imagery, which is very, very useful because it's the closest you get to absolute confirmation in OSINT because, if something's destroyed, it's clearly visible like night or day. The downside, of course, is, government agencies would have access to all kinds of additional satellite layering. So, for example, radio spectroscopy to see what's inside a building, what kind of materials are inside a building, and so on and so forth, which we don't have. We just have plain simple photography to do certain things. There are limitations, there are possibilities. The thing is, you really need to have you need to develop your own methodology, really, for ascertaining certain things. So, for example, if something's in public, how do you know something's a rumor? Is it a canard? Or is it a precursor to something tangible? So, my method is see to it that at least three people in a position of power say the same thing. In which case, you can say, well, this is validated. And, this is the academic thing. Every time you make a statement in a paper you're writing, you find three newspaper clips that back up your thesis. And so you apply the same method to it as much as possible. It's still not an exact science. It can go horribly wrong at times, but more often than not, it's actually very good.
That's what happened in journalism also, right? I mean, we all practice journalism, you always had to find a second source and so on and so forth. But OSINT takes it a step higher because of the use of advanced technology, like you're saying, satellite imagery and so on and so forth. And there is also a battle of OSINT, so to speak, which we saw in this Operation Singur also, where the Pakistanis had their own version, we had our own version in India, and there was obviously a battle going on in the narrative space. Talk to me a little bit about that. How is OSINT being weaponized?
So, it's there's no version really. It's actually a very clear whole picture. The question is who decides to claim victory. This is very much the case of, say, you and me getting into a battle. Uh, Over whatever, some Rasgulla that we like, and you beating me silly, like very visibly beating me silly, where my face is all puffed up, swollen up, my eyes are black and blue and whatnot, and both of us going back and claiming victory. Uh, why? Because people in my area haven't seen your face, so they believe me when I say that I blackened you, uh, well, beat you up black and blue, right? Now, the issue with OSINT is you can have all the information. People will only see what they want to, right? So, for example, what happened between Israel and Iran over the last few days, Iran is actually claiming victory. There are a lot of people, uh, I guess ideological people, who will see this as a victory. And then there is the part where, as an analyst, you do see that Iran's survival and the survival of certain nuclear assets within the Iranian regime, you know, it's not wrong to claim it's a victory. So there are no two sides here. There are no two versions here. There's no information warfare here. We can see Natanz is bombed. We can see Fordow has been bombed. We can see those six deep penetration holes at Fordow, which very clearly indicate the bombs went very deep. We see, gray concrete dust, but we also see some of the dust has a blue halo to it, which means it is some kind of radioactive material. But Iran is telling the IAEA there is no radioactive leakage. I seriously doubt that is the case, but at least the blue halo seems to indicate otherwise. Now, Arak has been bombed, which was the heavy water reactor, which means the plutonium road to a nuclear weapon is finished. There is no plutonium bomb. There is no Iranian plutonium bomb possible anymore. And finally, there is Isfahan reactor, nuclear facility, which is also gone. Now, none of this is in dispute. At the same time, there is Kohe Kolang. Now, if you take Natanz is the plateau. Kohe Kolang is the mountain on top of it. It's a much higher mountain than Fordow, which means the facility that's been, drilled into it is more than 1,000 feet under very, very thick, dense basaltic rock, right? Your GBU 57 bombs are not going to get through 1,000 feet of that kind of rock. It hasn't been touched. Now, the question lies now here in one of interpretation. You can say, sure, they got everything else, but look at Kohe Kolang. It's such a fantastic mountain. It's such a bunker, such a fortress. They weren't even able to entomb it. They weren't even able to bomb the entrances, the 3 entrances to it. You won't be wrong. You won't be wrong. In the India-Pakistan thing, I think the issue was somewhat different. Even during the conflict, it became very clear in the 3 days of that, 7th, 8th, 9th, and part of the 10th. It became very clear that we were able to inflict very, very heavy damage on Pakistan. And Pakistan was not able to inflict that damage on us. Now, if a journalist does not want to see it or has an agenda not to see it, there's nothing you can do about it. So these are the areas where OSINT won't help you. Now, remember, sure, maybe in those 3 days our PR wasn't terribly effective. I thought bringing the 2 lady officers was fantastic as a PR move on the first day. But after the first day, you need interactive press conferences. You can't have read statements. It was on the 10th, after the ceasefire, that we started putting out press conferences that mattered with all the imagery and everything showing the damage within Pakistan. But by that time, the world's attention had moved on. And so the belief is that when a smaller country, an economically weaker country, holds its own, which is the impression you would have gotten even from Indian TV for the first 3 days, then the small country is essentially won. And you see Israel again. Israel used to be the underdog. It's no longer the underdog. Israel is the overdog these days. So OSINT used to be powerful maybe for a while. Right now, it does pretty much nothing because in spite of all the imagery we put out, I was in Japan some time back. They were all of the view that Pakistan had won. And I showed them the imagery. They're like, yeah, we've seen it, but Pakistan won. Why did they win? Like these are military guys. These aren't, uninformed people. Oh, they held up against you. They were very confused. So, when you throw an information warfare blanket, it can overcome. Doesn't matter how good your OSINT is, it overcomes. Ultimately, I've learned that social media is a tool for self-validation. If it doesn't matter what kind of imagery, what kind of proof you put out, people are only going to take away what they want to see.
to me a little bit also, Abhijit, about the number of operators. I mean, even a few years ago, we did not have the number of operators who, some perhaps are legitimate people who are doing OSINT or using satellite imagery and, triangulating sources and trying to give information. But the sheer profusion of the number of players who have popped up on social media who claim to be giving this information makes one a bit suspicious about what's really going on. And I wonder whether you could talk about that. Just the sheer volume seemed to have suddenly jumped.
So, this was given a very deliberate push by the CIA. There still is this Twitter handle and website called Bellingcat, which was, very visibly, I mean, these kids had absolutely no experience. They had no experience with satellites and things like that. And they were putting out some imagery which was quite stunning, and analysis based on imagery. So it started off with the shooting down of the Malaysian Airlines plane over Ukraine. And they were able to, from the images of the shrapnel of the aircraft hitting the aircraft, the debris of the missiles, the fall pattern of the aircraft, figure out who had shot it down, what the missile was, where it had come from, etc., etc. Even then, there were a lot of questions raised about it. And since then, of course, it hasn't helped that Bellingcat's become a complete propaganda arm. We know it's funded by governments, by NATO governments, and things like that. Irrespective, I mean, leave Bellingcat aside. Today, Bellingcat isn't taken seriously by anyone serious. It's taken very seriously by non-serious people, but that's a different matter. Even at the Munich Security Conference, for example, a lot of these European, I remember there was this fantastic panel where Thomas Ilves, the president of either Latvia, Lithuania, or Estonia, I forget which of the three Baltic countries, was there with Elena Chernenko, who is the correspondent of Kommersant, the Russian newspaper. And he was talking about how great Bellingcat was. And Elena Chernenko just came in and did a systematic demolition of Bellingcat. She was talking about how they picked up, a blog post by two Kazakh nationals of Russian origin, of Russian ethnicity, who actually run a satire blog. And in that, they'd written about the greater Russian Empire and the reformed USSR. And Bellingcat has taken that as proof of Russian government expansionism. Right. So she did I mean, there was lots of stuff there. So if you ever get to see the video, watch it. It's a masterclass in how to take down the president of a country in public. That happened. But because of the attention Bellingcat got, a lot of people got into it who, many of these people I know who haven't even gone to college, but they are insanely brilliant. Like, you sit down with them. And this then raises the question, did Bellingcat have the credentials to do it or not? Forget the fact that Bellingcat became a propaganda organization. There are kids today I know who I give a satellite image to read, and they pick up on things I could never pick up on, right? They're able to go trace, they're able to run Google searches in ways I cannot, get extremely granular information, do an amazing background picture for me and things, background picture as in a verbal, a note for me on the history of a current context, who said what and things like that. It is truly astounding what you can do between access to the internet and access to imagery. And then when you start fusing them together, say the foreign minister of Iran said this, the president said this, was there truck movement on that day in any of the reactors? You start mixing, matching, and things like that. You build up an archive of imagery. It is truly astounding what you can get out of it. The thing is, because of that, it is also now financially very lucrative to be doing these things. And, the lack of expertise required, where you can essentially teach yourself and build up expertise, the glamour of it, and uh, uh, the demand for it um, as a means of independent verification have now become so high. I'm just surprised more people aren't going into it. The problem is there are also, very, very transparent frauds in the business. Um, and there's nothing you can do with it.
Talking about frauds, Abhijit, one of the things that I suddenly remembered when you're talking about this is, there used to be a handle called Ghost in the Machine or something like that when Operation Sindoor was on, which would put out all these information which would sound extremely technical. But if you read them carefully post after post, you would realize this is obviously not true. Like this is basically just a jumble up of fancy words. This is not correct. And yet thousands and thousands of people were sharing it, liking it. This causes a real time problem, especially when a conflict is going on. And this was a
Uh,
Pakistani handle.
yes, but also understand we did a lot of the same stuff, uh, and it was very useful. And I'll tell you why. The Pakistanis actually hired three companies that we know about. I'm not going to tell you which ones, but they hired three companies on a regular basis. So if you remember that famous image of the air control room with that Air Marshal Aurangzeb, Air Vice Marshal Aurangzeb, whatever he is, you can see the OSINT board on one side. So there were these OSINT uh, satellite companies that were actively monitoring OSINT to see where the next attack was coming from. They were hoping to see things, photographs people have taken at airports. Anybody reporting around Gwalior if Mirage 2000s or Rafales have taken off. Anybody reporting around Bombay if the ships are back in dock and things, so that they can then task satellites to take imagery. And I can tell you on the night of the, what was it, the 8th, when the heaviest damage, the early morning of the 9th, when the heaviest damage was done to the Pakistanis, um, several government agencies said very clearly, this is misinformation. You need to go heavily, heavily out on it. Um, I told them, I'm not going to do it. And they were like, that's fine. We don't want you to do it. We want you to put out credible stuff. Can you get others to do it? Yeah, absolutely. So we got everybody else to do it. They also did it. We know for a fact that on the night of the 8th and the morning of the 9th, we completely overwhelmed Pakistan's ability to detect anything coming from any direction because we overtasked all the satellite companies that they had hired. Right. So it's a very useful tool of deception. Uh, we need to separate that from so-called experts who actually do not know how to read an image, right? Or actually don't even know where to look sometimes. Um, Classic case, of course, was one of disinformation, not dis or miss, where, they were shown pictures, those European after Balakot. European diplomats were taken to this open area, told that this is where the bombing happened, and were even provide satellite imagery of. Now, we know that's not where the bombs fell, but that's what the Europeans were told. And that was the story that was spun in the media. But there are lots of people who do this regularly who um, are very transparent frauds. And the issue is it becomes like a case of the emperor's new clothes because most people don't understand how a conclusion has been reached. Because, not everything is a demolished building. A demolished building is very clear to the eye to see. But a lot of OSINT is not so clear. It's very nuanced, it's very subtle. And because people don't get it, they get, ooh, this is amazing, so on and so forth. And there's nothing you can do about it.
I just want to talk to you about what happens next, Abhijit. I mean, obviously these kind of abilities are growing, and somebody was asking me the other day, and want to put this to you that this time it was with Pakistan. Next time, if it's God forbid with China, the Chinese have huge abilities to do all kinds of digital mischief. What kind of resources can India bring to the table if such a fight were to occur, if such a collision were to occur?
So, this is one of those things where, God, it's such a horrible scenario, you don't want to really even think about it. Ultimately, the question we have to ask is, um, how long will it last? And are you able to calibrate the length to your desire? Now, Russia was able to calibrate the length of the first Ukraine war just to the annexation of Crimea. The second Ukraine war has taken 3.5 years and shows no signs of ending. Those battle lines that were frozen in the first 2-3 weeks of the war, they've neither expanded nor contracted very significantly. Russia is where it was 3.5 years back. Huge loss of man, machinery. But that said, Ukraine is losing a lot more men. The average service age has gone up from 24 to something like 54 right now. That's a 30-year increase in the average age. It's natural that a bigger country, country with greater industrial depth, will win. Now, China may not be a bigger country, but it certainly has vast industrial depth. There is nothing today that you get in India that isn't about 60 to 70% manufactured in China. It doesn't matter what people say. There is no electric vehicle on the Indian road where the batteries aren't coming from China. Even the Korean ones. So that being the case, we need to be very clear that all the advantages that apply to India vis-a-vis Pakistan then start applying to China vis-a-vis India. Sure, we may have some systems that are more advanced than the Chinese, but this is plain numbers. Elan, competence, brilliance, they can keep you afloat for a month at most, but then hard core logic of industrial supply chains comes into play. And there's nothing that can overcome industrial supply chains. And in this thing, Ukraine's a very sobering lesson, because what happens is, with Ukraine, they've been getting small infusions of high-tech stuff. But because the West has focused so much now on quality, there isn't enough quantity to be shared with the Ukrainians against essentially a second-rate power like Russia. And it's not second-rate because of numbers, it's second-rate because all its technologies have ossified in the 1980s, after which, no real technological innovation happened in Russia. On the other hand, you take China, it is fine, it's not America, but it is a first-rate power. The kind of quantity you will require quality in great quantity against the Chinese. Where are you going to get that from?
It's the same even in the digital space, right? I mean, this is a country that most likely was able to do a blackout using cyber hackers in Mumbai, no less. There are
Yeah.
constant worries at different levels on what kind of hackers are being used against India. So, in a conflict, if you put this kind of volume and digital prowess with all the OSINT stuff that we're talking about, that again is a very formidable enemy, isn't it, Abhijit?
It is, but look, there are certain success stories in our digital defenses as well. Remember, it's not just the Mumbai. The Mumbai one is unproven. What is proven is they actually hacked into the Kalpakkam nuclear reactor. The thing is that because there was a clear separation between the operational software and the human resources, the administrative software, they only hacked into the administrative parts of the computer of the Kalpakkam nuclear reactor. But look at something which we don't talk about, which is actually more brilliant, which is the public access digital infrastructure. Today when we say cash, we're talking about UPI on our phone. Nobody actually means cash. Uh, at one point of time, cash actually meant physical cash. Today, cash is just assumed. It is uh, when somebody actually gives out cash, you're surprised because when we say cash today, it means your mobile phone. We've been able to secure that in a way where it has not been affected on devices that are open to being backdoored by the Chinese, overwhelmingly Chinese, low cost devices that are sold in the Indian market. And yet we've contradictorily provided top notch security for it. Um, and I think where you put in a lot of thought into the infrastructure. So, for example, UPI is one of those things where normally governments don't have very good, at least the Indian government doesn't have very good conversations in between. But there's been a conversation on UPI, on the globalization of UPI, where on one hand parts of the government want a second UPI for redundancy, and others want UPI to expand so that it becomes a international norm, an international common good controlled by India, which actually took center stage because of the way America and Europe abused the
It's a
global
SWIFT system.
financial
Yeah.
uh, ecosystem
Yeah.
uh, at the beginning of the Ukraine war. So these are things where there is hope and there is danger. UPI is where the hope lies. The Kalpakam reactor is where the danger lies. Uh, can China throw enough brute force at us to overcome certain things? Absolutely, yes. Um, at the same time, I think we're taking that threat very, very seriously. I know for a fact that when it comes to the core system, which is UPI, uh, it's quite well guarded. When it comes to winning the propaganda war, I noticed the Chinese are very good at writing American papers, say the Washington Post or New York Times, to write their propaganda for them, but they're not very good at running their own propaganda. If you notice, Chinese propaganda is extremely crude, unsubtle, and unrefined. So, with things like electricity grids, the water release grids, these are all things that are protected by multiple levels. You're seeing this with Ukraine. How often has Russia tried to knock out the grid, and yet that Soviet designed Ukrainian grid is so resilient that power keeps coming back after 2, 3 hours of a strike, right? So there are inherent built-in redundancies in power, in water. The fact that we're not very digitized in the power distribution, in the water distribution, actually is a strength in this case. Backwardness is a strength. In case of digital infrastructure, where you are connected, where data has become so cheap that everybody today is connected. People don't realize that in 2014, before this government took over, India had a very high data rate. Today, India has one of the lowest data purchase rates anywhere in the world. And because of that, it's driven market penetration. So connectivity is high on extremely low end Android devices where you can install all kinds of spyware, crapware essentially. Forget the fact that the Chinese would have backdoors in all the phones. Their national cyber law requires all manufacturing companies to provide those backdoors to them. You can still have very good defenses because we're taking UPI seriously. If you don't get, say, Uber or Ola, look, that is up to Uber and Ola to look after their own protections. It's not up to us. But the government is working on a follow through, a sort of our own version of Android, a national, say, Indieroid, if you want to call it that. That sounds so bad, but anyway, India Android, um, which would get rid, and I know a lot of the research going into it is to provide redundancies to the backdoors and things like that. But let's see. I mean, you never really know till you know. because this time we were not expecting to be able to intercept drones, and our drone interception capability came as such a surprise. I hope that we're building up these surprises. I will prepare as if we are not.
One last question for you, Abhijit, going back to the where we began on the OSINT conversation. As this kind of abilities grow and really percolates at a citizen level, basically everybody with an internet connection is able to access at least a lot of stuff. May not be the highest end stuff, but a lot of stuff. Also, fears of this being manipulated in various ways, trying to create panic, trying to get disinformation. All of this potential also grows exponentially. Talk to me a little bit about our sheer manpower, if you will, since we are a country of great technological prowess. At least we pretend to be sometimes, maybe not in every direction. Do we have enough basic bench strength to do this?
In numbers, yes. Unfortunately, in training, we don't, because there's still those famous reports of 98% of Indian engineers couldn't problem solve. This is a continuing problem. We don't teach problem solving to our kids. I think there was a very damning report that came out yesterday or day before, which reinforced those things, that an Indian education prepares you for absolutely nothing. There is no problem solving. There is no, uh, question authority kind of training that's given. Uh, Unfortunately, what you have is a lot of random folks who are actual geniuses, uh, and that genius can be misdirected into all kinds of things. Uh, do we have the bench strength on balance? Yes. Are we utilizing our bench strength? No. Are we harnessing our bench strength? No. Can we build it up? Yes. Um, are we? No.
On that note, Abhijit Iyer Mitra, thanks very much. One of the great things I appreciate about you is your candor in all of these things. Sometimes people don't always tell the truth, but I appreciate your forthrightness and your candor on these issues. Thanks very much for your time. As always, a delight and a pleasure. No doubt, as all of this evolves, we'll get more opportunities to discuss all of this with you. Abhijit Iyer Mitra, thanks very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Indol. Always a pleasure.